Jormungandr.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to your weekly broadcast of 267AG. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to your weekly broadcast of 267AG The Bard. Farmer Martha Coldridge this week is making headlines in Mountebank as her entire herd has gone missing. 3 days ago, she woke in the early hours as normal to feed her 38 green slimes and to groom her prize-winning blood budding, Berta, only to find that each and every one has vanished. A review of the Coldridge property showed that several of the perimeter fences had been badly damaged, far in advance of what the slimes typically incur, leading Martha to conclude that they have in fact been stolen by agents unknown. Miss Coldridge has previously obtained national attention for her daring efforts to domesticate slimes for a variety of purposes. These slimes naturally exude a corrosive ooze that is commonly used in municipal works throughout the country, and their more vital elements are frequently sought after by mages, artificers, and alchemists across the map. Her show horse of sorts, Berta, has held pride of place in a dozen different shows celebrating the rearing of unruly specimens, and can be identified by the gold medallions suspended inside of her gelatinous form. Lord Fairchild of the Oakred Provincial Monster Command is asking for any reports of the missing slimes, but warns that any threat of harm to surrounding communities will necessitate that the entire herd be eradicated. This warning naturally caused considerable outcry in Mountebank, which uses Miss Coldridge's unusual farm as a prime source of tourism. As it is, Coldridge Farm has been in a questionable legal position for years, which to date has only been ignored due to Miss Coldridge's supply of numerous public works with resources from her unique form of livestock. Should the herd be recovered, this might be considered the final straw for the farm, and if the herd has to be destroyed, it may be impossible for Martha to obtain any new stock. Joining me from Mountebank via local relay today is Captain Henry Squire of the Oakred Provincial Monster Command. Welcome to the show, Captain.
Thank you, Bard.
Now, first things first here, I think, what should people in Mountebank be doing to stay safe right now? Is there any particular concern or actions they can take with regards to these slimes?
Well, with slimes, one has to remember that they're very dumb creatures, unintelligent. So you should maintain a safe distance and alert your local authorities if you do see any. Failing that, if they're too close to you or anything, try chucking something large, like a sack of flour or potatoes or anything like that at it, because it will most likely start to digest them, and in that time, you can run away.
Now, with that particular notion, you mentioned they may in fact try to attack people in that regard. Is there any particular precautions they should take if they should face an attack by slime?
Well, an attack by slime, it's not a very pretty thing at all. For if you try and strike at them, cutting them in half, they'll just turn into two more slimes, and their physical form is corrosive. So using many armors and stuff like that, you'll find that quickly it's not affording much resistance whatsoever. Generally, it's best to run. They're not particularly fast creatures. They don't have huge amounts of mobility. So running away from them is generally the best. If you encounter them in some kind of a home situation, such as if you're in Mountebank or anything like that, then you should probably close your doors, barricade them, and remain on upper floors. You could also communicate with your neighbours and stuff by calling out of your windows and trying to report to the local authorities, the PMC.
Right. Now, you mentioned the local authorities, as of course you're a captain in the OPMC. Miss Coldridge mentions that indeed her farm may have been broken into, that the damage found to some of the surrounding barriers of the enclosure was significantly greater than the slimes themselves normally do. Is the OPMC considering the fear that these slimes may have been stolen?
Well, I can't disclose the current affairs of our present investigations. We are still
but given that this may in fact be a thief, is there anything that would warrant a thief trying to steal away with a group of domesticated slimes?
Well, I mean, certainly yes, It may not particularly be a thief, but any slime rustlers may be interested in the economic value, as you've mentioned before, just earlier on this show. The extracts from the slimes are used in many different practices, magical, construction, etc. And so just harvesting these slimes could be of great value to any kind of thief. Otherwise, it could even be, a monsters' right activist people who don't believe in the domestication of monsters, and so they want to set them free. So, or it could even be industrial sabotage from competitors, or could be some kind of terrorist attack on the surrounding communities by trying to free unruly monsters into their midst. So,
You're suggesting this may have been a terrorist action then?
well, I wouldn't go so far as to say, as I'm saying we're still in our investigation and we haven't drawn any conclusions yet. But you don't know. And with things as dangerous as monsters residing near to common folk, you can't take out the account that they could be used as a weapon.
True, as was certainly demonstrated in the Mergen-Verga conflict not too long ago. The Verga did happen to encourage the use of monsters in its regiments.
Indeed, can't forget about that.
Now, Lord Fairchild has said that the slimes may need to be exterminated. What are the odds that such action is going to be necessary? These are ostensibly tame creatures.
Well, you say they're ostensibly tame, but that's only around the Miss Coleridge. You know, she was obviously training them and taming them. These creatures, they've got a blind sense about them. So recognizing another person as Miss Coleridge probably wouldn't be too likely. As it is, they're very unintelligent and they may lash out when threatened. So try not to approach them or anything. But if they're roaming free, then they may be widespread and more difficult to secure, in which case exterminating individual ones of them and determining whether, on the whole, they are likely to be threatening may lead to us needing to form out a large perimeter scouring for them and killing them as we discover them. Otherwise, if they could form a horde and start roaming around in search of large caches of food, then that in itself could be a very threatening thing indeed, and our highest priority would not be preserving the creatures' lives. I would assure you that. Our highest priority would be, preserving all of our common folks' lives.
Now, certainly no one is going to dismiss the considerations that these slimes may prove difficult, may prove dangerous, may prove hazardous to the local population. But if Miss Coleridge can't get her slimes back, if they do have to be exterminated, as you say, what likelihood is there that the farm will be able to obtain any new stock? Could this be the end of nearly 40 years of trade for the Coleridge family?
Well, yes, my sympathies are with Miss Coleridge, obviously, our farm has had a large presence on the communities around here.
It's become a fixture of Mountebank, in fact.
Yes, that's true. But we can't allow public citizens to house dangerous creatures like these without any of the proper protocols around it, you understand? She's shown that she's got demonstrable skill with the slimes, been running for 40 years and never had problems with quality, or so I've heard. If the family wants to continue its operation, I think that it's probably best if it works alongside the PMC. You realise if they do that, then they could perhaps have support from the government in creating more enclosed and protected facilities, in having more guards around it in case of any kinds of rustling attacks or terrorist attacks or anything. But she'd have to make sure that it conforms to all the current regulations and legislature. I'd say it's probably best if we start moving out of private citizens' hands with these monster breeding facilities and rather start moving towards more whole-scale, larger and more regulated facilities for the good of all people.
Now, naturally, that would have some kind of impact upon the inclusion of creatures like Berta in these wonderful little unruly creature contests.
Yes, well, one has to remember that these contests are completely unsanctioned, and as far as they go, I think they could provide a larger danger to the public that's going to watch them. We only have to bring up a count of that previous one. What was it? The Grey Render, which turned on.
Oh yes, Herbert the Grey Render.
Yes, indeed, turned on its own owner. And that one was supposed to be extremely well trained. Well, when you've got a large collection of the prime specimens of many different kinds of monsters in one place, I'm sorry, but I think you're asking for something to go wrong.
Now, just a few more points, I think, before we let you go here. Coldridge Farm was established before the Sanctity Decree by Count Windermere, but was allowed to continue operating afterwards, in large part due to its value to the public good and certain ties to the government. Should it still then be allowed to operate and obtain more stock now? If it's already being allowed, is it not okay for it to continue?
Well, with regards to Miss Coldridge and her farm and the public good that was being generated from it, well, in the 40 years that she's been operating, there has not been any instances of incidents of this kind of nature. So there was no real reason to try and enforce this sanction on her at that time. They were still mostly valuable, and as it goes, there weren't any examples at that point of any endangerment to the public around. Well, now we do have that example. I think, in all honesty, public entities should not be allowed to continue this practice of monster rearing, as there are too many variable factors which could go wrong, and it only takes one slip up to ensure the loss of life for many around them. You can also think about how these private public entities could become targets to many others, competitors and the likes. If it's all under the PMC, then anybody seeking to attack that and to steal from that, well, they're looking at a much higher case of a much higher penalty put upon them for attacking a public and governmental institution. You see, the grey render, as I said before, that Herbert, yeah, it provided quite a large bit of discomfort, and well, I don't want to beat around the bush too much, but it killed its owner. This is an entire herd of slimes.
Now, I do have to correct you on that record, Mr. Squire, here, because Herbert did not, in fact, kill anyone. It was simply it was described as a manic outburst in which Herbert tragically merely broke the arm of his owner.
Well, we can't be ascribing any kind of, what's the word that I'm looking for, Bard, intention behind these creatures, because they are monsters after all. For all you know, it could have broken its arm whilst it was trying to disembowel him, I'm not saying that it was. Either way, we can see that these creatures can possess a credible threat against the humans around them, especially the humans that are training them.
Not true, but in given the benefits that Coldridge Farm has provided over the years, does this not perhaps indicate, as you say, it was perfectly fine for the farm to continue as long as it had an untarnished record? Should this not therefore be some evidence that it's perfectly okay for public entities to practice monster rearing? Should the Sanctity Decree perhaps be revised? Should it even be abandoned entirely, some may say?
Well, abandoned entirely, that's quite a large thing to say. We can't disregard the decree and the good that it's provided the nation since its inception 20 years ago. It's done awful amounts of good. We haven't had many cases along these lines in all this time because the
certainly
sanction
Herbert was more or less the most recent up until now. Yes.
Perhaps we may wish to revise it slightly so that private entities such as Miss Coldridge, whom have shown their professional practice, could be absorbed into a PMC operation. Highly supervised and controlled farms could be allowed to operate as long as they were undergoing sufficient regular supervision. But
they should be supervised. They should be managed. We should make sure that they have a certain standard of employment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, a high standard of employment, high amount of security around the thing. It should be observed by PMC officials and made sure that everything is up to scratch, and then perhaps even have some private bodyguards assigned to the farm to make sure that nobody attacks it at any vulnerable times.
Right.
But we'd be much worse off without the Sanctity Decree. I guarantee that.
Okay, so your personal position is that we should adjust or slightly reinterpret the decree rather than
Well,
rather than
I
remove it
wouldn't go
entirely.
so far as put in those words. You know, that's not necessarily my personal opinions. I just think that perhaps with certain cases, such as Miss Coleridge, it would be more worthwhile for her to try and get into contact with the PMC and to establish these kind of relations uh, rather than just operating outside of their jurisdiction freely.
So, in your professional and personal opinion, what implications does this incident have for other legacy establishments, such as that of formerly Herbert's owner and certainly that of Miss Coldridge right now? They've managed to skirt the law, as it were, right now to escape the consequences of the decree, but could this be an ill omen for them?
Well, I think they should take this as an example. You know, no matter what precautions you take as a private individual, no matter how you tame your herd, external factors will always exist to try and sabotage and, you know, with petty squabbles, to try and take control over your flock or to try and undermine your possession. You know, um, anyone operating outside of the wording of a sanctity decree should try and cooperate with the PMCs, their local monster command branch, to try and keep things properly secured and operational. But we can look at these monster rearing farms and we can see some of the benefits that they do have upon society, such as in construction and in magic materials, etc., of course. But we need to make sure that our top priority, our citizens, are always secure from these threats. As such, I'd say that anybody who's currently operating private farms should look towards cooperating with the PMC to make sure that their facilities are as secure as possible and are operating within the guidelines of the sanctity decree.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Henry Squire. That, of course, was Captain Henry Squire of the Oakred Provincial Monster Command. If you are happening to be around the Mountebank area and see a large group of some 30 slimes, do alert your local authorities and do try to stay safe, everyone. Still no word from Lord Holwood of the Blue Tree Provincial Monster Command as to the location of the Vergen troll that broke through the border pass near Ormstad last week. We'll try and keep you up to date on that. Until then, this has been The Bard. Catch you here on 267 AG next week.